In the year 2018, Sony gave us Venom, a movie that spawned a franchise that was a tease for a showdown between him and Spider-Man. And after seeing the first movie, even though it wasn't exactly what I pictured a Venom movie to be, it was still a promising start. And as bad as that wig was in the post-credit scene for Cletus Cassidy, and trust me, it was bad. I don't care how comic accurate it was. And how you know it was bad is because in the actual sequel, which takes place maybe days after the first movie, we see Woody Harrelson sporting some kind of fringe bowl cut. And honestly, other than the wig situation, the only other thing that I remember about the second Venom movie is, ironically enough, the post-credit scene, which is where it looked like they were starting to build towards a fight with Spider-Man. Because not only did they bring Venom into the MCU, but when he sees Peter Parker on TV, there's an implication that he knows him. And the hype generated behind this scene in particular was just insane, because just a few months later, we'd get Spider-Man No Way Home. And there was even rumors that Venom could have been a part of that Sinister Six. But when it came time to finally see the movie, watching Tobey and Andrew be Spider-Man again almost made me forget that Venom was supposed to be in this movie. But once again, during the post-credit scene, we'd see Eddie Brock sitting at a bar and taking notes about the world that he's in. And when suggesting that he go to New York to meet Spider-Man, he would start to glow, then he goes right back to his own universe. Meaning that the entire interaction between Venom and Spider-Man throughout the Venom franchise was only in post-credit scenes. And while some people saw this as a waste of time, I still had hope. And with the news of a third Venom movie in the works, I thought it could be a chance that he finds the Spider-Man in his universe, because, I mean, that's where the story was going, right? Well, no, because for the third movie, the writers at Sony wanted to do something very different. They wanted us to essentially forget about the second movie, then introduce characters and plot points that go nowhere, just to rush to the end and, spoiler alert, kill Venom. But is he really dead? Yeah, he's probably dead. Tom Hardy's not coming back for this.
What happened to we? What happened to we?
But there you have it, an entire franchise worth of Venom movies that started with promise but just ended with disappointment. But what if we actually had a Venom movie that not only had Spider-Man in it, but it would also show a unique friendship between Eddie Brock and Peter Parker, kinda like how it was in the PlayStation 5 Spider-Man 2 game, but from a different point of view. And honestly, it kinda sounds like what we should have got from the beginning, especially considering how Sony likes to make changes in continuity. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Now, let's get into Venom. We begin our story with a young and upcoming photographer named Eddie Brock, and he comes to New York City to make a name for himself. And with a particular eye for nature photography, he goes to the Daily Bugle to ask for a job. But when he's about to knock on the door to Jameson's office, he'd run right into Peter Parker, who just got yelled at by J. Jonah Jameson. And when seeing another would-be photographer about to enter the lion's den that is Jameson's office, Peter would say, "Hey man, if you're gonna ask Jameson for a job, just say that you're a freelance photographer and give him this." He says, handing him a picture of Spider-Man, and Eddie would take the picture and introduce himself to Peter. And from that moment on, the two would become inseparable, even becoming roommates at the Midtown College together. But every now and then, Peter would suddenly disappear, sometimes for hours on end. And when he does come back, he always has a convenient excuse for his disappearance, like staying at his Aunt May's house for the weekend, or his favorite excuse is meeting up with his quote-unquote friend Spider-Man to take his picture, which does explain the photo that he gave him when they first met. But the truth is, Peter Parker's actually Spider-Man, and he's been the wall crawler for a little over 3 years. But to Eddie and nearly everyone around him, they would just think that Peter has the worst time management, and him being late or disappearing would just become something that Peter is, and over time, nobody would even think too much about it. But when they do hang out, they have a friend group that includes the likes of a young Otto Octavius, Harry Osborn, and of course, Mary Jane Watson. And ever since being introduced to Peter's friends, Eddie's had the biggest crush on MJ. And although she knows that Eddie really likes her, she doesn't feel the same way about him. And for the sake of their friendship, she just keeps him firmly in the friend zone. But over time, he'd start to obsess over her. And with him and Peter being as close as they are, all Eddie would talk about is how beautiful MJ is and how much he'd love to date her. And he'd even ask Peter for advice on getting a date with her. But not wanting to make things awkward in the friendship group, he tells him that there's plenty of girls on the campus and he should just go for one of them. But the real reason why Peter wants him to go for another girl is because him and MJ has secretly been dating for a little over 2 weeks. So as awkward as these conversations are with him and Eddie, he'd want to keep this relationship a secret for now, especially given Eddie's obsession with her. But when Peter and MJ do talk about him, Mary Jane insists on Peter just ripping the band-aid off and telling Eddie, because the longer that this goes on, the more it feels like they're lying to him. But for Peter, he knows a thing or two about keeping a secret. I mean, after all, he still hasn't told her that he's Spider-Man, so keeping his own relationship a secret wouldn't be too hard for him. But one day, when getting home early from work, Eddie walks in on Peter making out with Mary Jane. And seeing them together, Eddie tries not to show that he's bothered, but his anger gets the best of him and he storms out the apartment and slams the door so hard that it rattles the pictures on the wall, leaving Peter and MJ in total shock that Eddie would have taken things this bad. But instead of going after him, they decide to just let him blow off some steam, and when he does come back, then they can talk. But after a few hours, they would go out looking for him, but they wouldn't find him, and when his phone turned off, it's like finding a needle in a haystack in the city of New York. But just a few blocks away, Eddie has just made it to his favorite spot in a nearby park by a clock tower. And right now, he just wants to be alone. And with his camera in his book bag, he blows off some steam by taking some pictures of the park surroundings. Because even though it's not as exciting as taking pictures of Spider-Man, Eddie's a really good photographer. But with it approaching midnight and a low battery on his phone, he starts to get ready to go. But when glancing up at the stars, he looks at a meteorite coming his way, and it would land close by where he was. And with no one else around, he goes to investigate what it is. And as he gets closer to the meteor, a black ooze suddenly drips out. And noticing it start to move, he sticks his hand out to touch it. But when he gets too close, tendrils come out and grab a hold of his hand, which freaks him out. And as he tries to pull away, the more he struggles, the more the goo gets on him. And when he stops moving, he notices that the goo's gone. But he doesn't see it on the ground or anywhere nearby. It's like it just disappeared. But really, it absorbed into his body. And while still looking around for it, he hears a voice in his head call his name, which causes him to freak out even more. Mainly because there's no one around him. And he says, Who's there? And the voice replies in a sinister tone saying, I'm here to help you, Eddie. And after calming down, he'd learn more about the symbiote and what it wants. And he'd find out that his name is Venom and he's just looking for a home since being cast out by his own species. Which to Eddie, he can definitely relate with him feeling betrayed by both Peter and Mary Jane. So with the two both feeling like outcasts of their own kind, they bond over their hatred of others. And with Venom attached to him, he'd also be influencing his emotions and making him more confident, but also more aggressive. And I'd like to imagine their relationship how it was in the Venom movies, with them having a light banter between each other. But to everyone else, Eddie's now more of an asshole like the Eddie Brock in Spider-Man 3. And it would also beg the question of, did the symbiote change Eddie, or was he always like this? Picking up the next day, Eddie spends the entire night talking to Venom, and if it wasn't for the low battery chime on his phone, he would have forgot that he had to be at work soon. And after going nearly 24 hours with no sleep, Eddie has never felt better. So when he walks through the bugle, he'd strut through the building, and showing a stark contrast to how he was in the beginning. And across the hall, he spots Peter, who's waving to get his attention. Then he walks over to him and says, Hey Eddie, are you good? You know, you kind of had me worried last night when you didn't come home. And Eddie tells him, Yeah Pete, I'm good. I think time just got away from me, that's all. And Peter would then say to him, Okay, that's good. But hey man, I think we need to talk about yesterday. But Eddie tells him with a half smile, If it's about you and MJ, don't even worry about it. I definitely overreacted, but it's all good, Pete. And Peter says, You sure? I mean, I don't want you to think I was going behind your back or anything. Pete, seriously, it's all good. Eddie says, putting his arm around Peter's shoulder and then saying, Like you said, there's plenty of girls on campus, and I did have my eye on this blonde chick named Gwen, and who knows, maybe we can double date if anything, but I'll catch you later, Pete. I got some shots I want to show Jonah. He says, walking away and leaving Peter in the lobby at the Daily Bugle. But ironically enough, this would be the last time we see Eddie inside the Bugle. And over the next few weeks, Eddie grows distant from Peter, his friends, and everyone else around him, and he just wants to be alone. But really, he spends all his time learning the symbiote and all of its abilities. From super strength to shape-shifting, I mean, Eddie can pretty much do anything. But when the notification comes in that his rent's due soon, he'd ask Venom what he should do. And in response, the symbiote would discreetly influence his emotions when telling him, We can do whatever we want. And when looking at a bank that's off in the distance, Eddie gets an idea. And at this point, we'd be treated to a montage of robberies that start with him stealing entire ATMs and building up to bank robberies, but always making it a point that nobody ever gets hurt. And for better or worse, things work out pretty well for Eddie, so much so that he starts to date Gwen Stacy and he really starts to show off. And him and Peter would finally get that double date, but when a person has no job but always has money and even insists on paying the entire bill of multiple dates, that's when eyebrows start to get raised. But when asked where he's getting his money from, Eddie keeps it vague by just saying that he does freelance jobs here and there. And that reasoning may work for MJ and Gwen, but for Peter, he just has a feeling that there's something that Eddie's not telling him. So for the rest of the date, he plays it cool. And the next day, he suits up as Spider-Man and follows Eddie while he's doing his quote-unquote freelance. But things prove to be difficult when Peter's swinging through the city, and on 3 separate occasions, he loses track of Eddie, whether it's lost in a crowd of people or just going to stores with multiple exits. But down on the ground, Venom is telling Eddie exactly where to go, because he knows that they're being followed. And to evade Spider-Man, they go down a nearby alleyway, and using the symbiote abilities, he would lean against a brick wall and would morph into it, essentially hiding right in plain sight. And after a few minutes, Spider-Man is no longer in the area. And although seeing the web slinger made him extremely nervous, Venom calms him down by getting inside his head. And when they unmorph from the wall, it turns out that they were right next to a bank they were about to rob. So once inside, like usual, the plan is to get in and get out. But when a test fire drill goes off, the sound frequency would cause Eddie to scream out in pain and the Venom symbiote to detach from him. And after a few seconds, the alarm turns off, and he calls out for Venom in a whispered tone. But instead, he gets the attention of a security guard patrolling the building. And when a flashlight is shined in his face, he only hears, "Hands up, now!" And with the guard getting closer to him, Venom reattaches to Eddie, and for the first time, he turns into the full Venom that we all know and love. But in complete fear, the guard opens fire on Venom, but the bullets would do no damage. And in retaliation, Venom looks down at the security guard, and he bites his head off, then lets out a monstrous roar before leaving away from the bank. And when he gets to a rooftop that's clear, he turns back into Eddie. And after vomiting, he's forced to sit with the realization that he didn't just kill somebody, but he ate somebody. And he asks Venom, What did we just do?" And in response, the symbiote says, "We did what we had to do." And in a matter of a few short seconds, the guilt and trauma that he was just feeling is suddenly gone. Because not only is Venom trying to convince him that what they did wasn't that serious, but because they're so compatible, he also has the slightest control over his mind, and he slowly starts to manipulate his memory and his emotions. So when the next day does come around, it would all just feel like a bad dream to him. But even though he's forgotten what he's done, the string of bank robberies plus a dead security guard would be more than enough to get the attention of Spider-Man. But that would be the least of his concerns, because instead of him feeling guilt for killing an innocent person, he's more frustrated that he didn't grab any money from the robbery, and he takes it out on his girlfriend when she asks to see a movie, and he blows up on her by saying, "Gwen, seriously, is all you think about is different ways on spending my money? I mean, how about you pay for a change?" And being surprised by this outburst, she just say, "Sorry, jeez." And he just looks at her and says, "Are you?" And that leaves her lost for words, and she would just get up and leave his house without even saying bye. And even after she slammed the door, Eddie wouldn't even react to her leaving. Mainly because right now, in his mind, he's talking to Venom. 20 minutes later, we pick up with Gwen, who meets up with Otto, Harry, and MJ. And she tells him that something's wrong with Eddie and would ask if they can go and talk to him. And although Eddie was acting like a jerk for the past few weeks, at the end of the day, that's still their friend. So when they go back to the apartment, Gwen comes inside with Harry, Otto, and MJ, who stands by her side while the guys go and talk. And it wouldn't be long before the conversation turns into a full-on argument. And the more Eddie just tries to walk away, Otto, who's physically larger than him, would block his way and essentially putting him in a corner. And now with everyone in the house yelling at him, he reaches a breaking point when he screams out for everyone to shut up. And he pushes against Otto to get past him, but using his size to his advantage, he holds Eddie in place. But he wouldn't hold him for long, because after getting loose from Otto's grip, Eddie, who's completely unaware of his new strength, would punch Otto in the spine so hard that he would start to foam out the mouth before going unconscious. But when Eddie realizes what he's done, he looks around at Harry, Gwen, and MJ, who all look scared of him. And when looking down at the unconscious body of Otto, without even thinking about it, he transforms into Venom, picks up Otto, and leaps through the window. And in a blink of an eye, he disappears into the night sky. And while jumping from rooftop to rooftop, Eddie realizes that he just revealed the Venom symbiote to Harry, Gwen, and MJ. But at the moment, all he would care about is getting his friend to the hospital as fast as he can. Because even though Venom has a grip on his mind, he still has that one rule in place to not let anyone get hurt. And maybe he failed the security guard that he ate, but his friends are all that he has, and he would do anything for them. And side note, I know I didn't really touch on the friendships a lot, but I'd imagine that in those situations where Peter just disappears, Harry, Eddie, and Otto would all have a pretty tight bond. and that's why Gwen came to them for help with Eddie. So when Venom/Eddie does make it to the hospital, immediately he causes panic in the area, and everyone is running away scared because he's in full Venom form and he looks like a monster. But to him, he's just trying to get his friend some help, but nobody would even try to listen. And things only get worse when the police come, and seeing Venom holding an incapacitated Otto Octavius, they would yell for him to put him down while also having their guns drawn. And as Eddie gently puts Otto down in the stretcher, he's hit with a flashbang that makes him mad. And when he gets mad, it's easier for Venom to take control. And when he does, he would not hold back going after the police officers. And this scene would be reminiscent of the first Venom movie when he was attacking those officers inside the Carlton Drake building. And when getting down to the last person with a gun, Venom approaches him with every intention on eating him. But at the very last minute and seemingly out of nowhere, Spider-Man swings through and kicks Venom out the building and on the street. And after telling everyone to get to safety, he goes after Venom. But once he gets out on the street, Spider-Man is face to face with a massive black goo monster, and he's just trying to make sense of what he's fighting. Because he's faced off with bank robbers and street thugs his entire career as Spider-Man, and he's never had a struggle. But this is the first time he's fighting something otherworldly. And with Venom in full control right now, the fight between him and Spider-Man would only be even for a few minutes. But after that, Venom would overwhelm him, and the fight ends with a billboard sign being dropped on Spider-Man. And while struggling to get free, he sees Venom approaching him, and just when he thought he was done for, the loud police sirens can be heard nearby, and the sound frequency causes the symbiote to yell out in pain before leaving the area. And with the sirens blaring as loud as they are, it would cause the Venom symbiote to retreat back inside Eddie and leaving him vulnerable. But not wanting to be seen, Eddie once again hides in a nearby alleyway. And until things calm down, he'd be having a conversation with Venom while also watching the comings and goings of the police in the area. We then cut to Harry, who just made it to the hospital from Eddie and Peter's apartment, and after sneaking past some crime scenes, he'd make it to where a fallen billboard is. And when he sees some of the wreckage moving, he quickly goes over to help whoever's trapped underneath it. And after moving some rebar and light rubble out the way, he would see Spider-Man, who's barely conscious. And after helping him up, the two would run down the same alleyway that Eddie's in. But when Harry scans the area to make sure that no one's around, Harry takes off Spider-Man's mask to reveal a barely conscious Peter Parker. And he says, "Come on, Pete, stay with me, buddy." And Eddie, who's hiding in the shadows near a dumpster, is in complete shock to find out that his best friend for all this time is actually Spider-Man. But slowly that shock turns into anger when he sees that Harry was trusted with this secret and not him. And he even starts to feel jealous of Peter as well, because not only was he able to get the girl, but he's also the most popular superhero in New York. And with all these emotions swirling around in Eddie's mind, Venom would manipulate him into believing that Peter took everything from him. And once they kill him, they'll be the real hero. The next day, Peter wakes up in Harry's apartment, and while holding his ribs, he tries to get up and stand, but MJ tells him to take it easy because he has a few cracked ribs. And seeing that he's still in his spider suit, he looks at Mary Jane and says, "I was gonna tell you." But she tells him, "Oh Peter, I've always known." And they share a moment together before Harry comes in saying, "Great, you're up." And Peter tells him, "Thanks for getting me out of there, Harry, but what was that thing?" And Harry says, "Whatever that thing is, it's Eddie." And that leaves Peter baffled as to how this could have happened. And as Harry and MJ are telling Peter everything that happened yesterday, from the fight with Otto to Eddie transforming into that monster, out of nowhere, Mary Jane gets a phone call from the hospital saying that Otto is stable and he can be seen. And with Peter now up, the three of them rush down to the hospital to see Otto. But when they get there, they see that his body is completely bandaged up and machines are helping him breathe. And the nurses say that right now he is sedated, but because the way that he was hit in the spine, he's now a quadriplegic. And as the nurse leaves, they all look over Otto and is just saddened by what happened to him. But in the middle of their grieving, there would be a knock at the door and Gwen comes inside to see everyone there. And after being told the extent of Otto's injuries, she bursts into tears and blames herself for how everything went down. But Mary Jane consoles her and tells her that nobody could have known that Eddie had this creature inside of him. And that's when Peter speaks up and says, "Well, I should have probably known." And technically that is true, because with him being Spider-Man plus Eddie's roommate, you would think that he would have seen something first. But because he didn't, he's now taking full blame of what happened to Otto. But in the middle of his guilt trip, Harry would snap him out of it and just say, Guys, we can spend all day blaming ourselves for what happened, but somebody has to stop him. And as Mary Jane and Harry looks to Peter, Gwen is just confused at how they're supposed to stop Eddie. And that's when Peter looks to Gwen and pulls the neck of his t-shirt to reveal the spider suit underneath. And he tells Gwen that he is Spider-Man and she may have a lot of questions, but right now, he needs her help. And after agreeing, the four of them work together on a plan to figure out how to stop Eddie. We pick up with Spider-Man swinging through the city, and with him still injured, he figured the best approach for Eddie is just to talk him down. So essentially using Gwen Stacy as bait, she would call Eddie and ask him to meet her at an abandoned clock tower. And surprisingly, he not only answers the phone, but he tells her that he's not that far away and can be there in 5 minutes. And when Eddie gets there, he seems to be normal, but as he calls out for Gwen, he would instead be greeted by Spider-Man. And at first, Eddie pretends that he doesn't know what's going on. But when Spider-Man unmasks himself, Peter would say, "Eddie, whatever's inside of you, please, let me help." And Eddie, who doesn't even seem to be fazed by Spider-Man's unmasking, says, "If you really wanted to help me, the first thing that you would have did is just tell me about you and MJ instead of having me look like a fool by telling you how I feel about her." And Peter says as he walks towards him, "You're right. I should have said something, but I didn't. And I'm sorry." But then Eddie would say in a fit of rage, "And what, you thought telling me that your Spider-Man was going to do anything? It just shows me that you just have one more secret that you're keeping from your best friend. Or at least I thought it was, but evidently you trust Harry with this more than me." And Peter says, "Eddie, that's not true." But like a switch has been flipped in his mind, Eddie yells in a monstrous tone, "Stop lying!" as he turns into Venom and punches Peter into a nearby wall. And throughout the fight, Peter is once again outmatched by Venom's aggression. But thinking on his feet, he would use that to his advantage. And he brings up what he did to Otto, which causes Eddie to get even angrier. And watching the fight from the top of the clock tower would be Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy. And they would bond over having superhero boyfriends and not knowing about it. But the conversation is quickly interrupted when Spider-Man comes careening through the window. And as glass shatters on the floor, he yells for both of them to get away. But before he can get the last word out, Venom comes through like a bull in a china shop to chase after Spider-Man. So as MJ and Gwen tries to get away, the fight that's happening is literally shaking the entire building. And with the only way down being the stairs, they go as fast as they can down the steps. And over with Peter, he's doing his best to dodge and evade Venom's attacks, which are literally destroying the building that they're in. And when Peter gets distracted watching MJ and Gwen go down the stairs, Venom connects with a punch that sends him flying in the direction of his girlfriend. And luckily, they were able to get out the way. But once again, Venom is coming right behind Spider-Man. And with the four of them in such a tight space, as well as Peter trying to protect the girls, it leaves him open for an attack. And for some reason, his spider sense isn't working. So as Venom connects with another punch, it breaks the ground that they're all standing on. And in a fraction of a second, Spider-Man finds himself holding both MJ and Gwen while trying to thwip out of there. But before he can press the button on his web shooter, Venom knocks him off balance, causing him to drop Gwen. And as both Peter and Venom watch her fall, they both try to catch her, and they both fail, leaving Gwen to fall to her death. And as surrounding pieces of metal begins to fall around them, it creates a sound frequency that Venom would not be able to handle, and it would detach from Eddie and escape through a crack in a wall. And instead of going after it, Peter has more than enough to deal with right now, because not only is Gwen Stacy dead because of the fight that they just had, but Peter has to be the one to turn Eddie into the police. We fast forward a month later, and things are about as normal as they can be. Peter's now living with his Aunt May. Mary Jane started a podcast with the hopes of becoming a reporter. As for Otto, he's in a wheelchair at the moment, but with both him and Peter's scientific mind, they work on something that can give him mobility again. But as for Eddie, he's locked up in a maximum security prison, and because he was bonded with the symbiote for so long, his mind is not what it used to be. And from time to time, he would get visions of Venom and even think that he hears his voice. And one day, while looking through a window, a familiar black substance would be on the other side. And we end with Eddie once again sticking his hand out to it. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed my version of Venom, because at least he had the white Spider-Man symbol on his chest, and at the end of the day, that's kinda all we wanted. I mean, other than a fight with Spider-Man. But I do plan on a sequel to eventually make my own Venomverse, but really that does depend on how this video is received, because if you're new to my channel, or if you've been here, I typically do Breaking Bad what if content, but lately I've been trying to branch out just not to put myself in a box. because the goal is to eventually work on my own stories and make my own characters to turn them into a comic, web series, or even anime or TV show probably. But that's somewhere way down the road. But for now, I'm just testing the waters to know what kind of stories I can tell. But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this story? Did you like it? Do you want a sequel? And what is the next movie or TV show I should do a what if on? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. Until then, my name is Merge. Later.